Hey guys, how's it going? In today's video, I list 10 games over 20 years old that humiliate today's releases, proving that the past can still reign supreme. I'm Matthew, and we start the list with Max Payne, released in 2001 by Remedy. The game introduced a gameplay mechanic that would become a reference in the third-person shooter genre, bullet time. This feature, which allows the player to slow down time to aim and react with greater precision, wasn't just a visual gimmick, but a central element of the gameplay. Its implementation required the player to build a meter by eliminating enemies, encouraging an aggressive and calculated playstyle. Technically, the projectile physics and enemy responses to impacts were notable for the time, giving each shot weight and consequence. The narrative of Max Payne is presented in a noir comic book format, with stylized panels and narration by the protagonist himself. This aesthetic choice not only circumvented the graphical limitations of the era to create cinematic scenes, but also reinforced the dark and pessimistic tone of the story. The plot, involving a cop seeking revenge for his family's death, dives into themes of conspiracy and betrayal, with a script that stood out for its maturity and complexity, in a period when narratives and action games were often secondary. The level design in Max Payne directly complemented the bullet time mechanic. The environments, though linear, were filled with destructible objects and cover points that allowed the player to use time slowdown strategically. The enemy placement was planned to create intense action sequences, requiring the player to master the shoot dodge, a move that combined a slow-motion jump with the ability to shoot. This synergy between level design and core mechanics resulted in a gratifying combat flow.
No. Yo!
First Encounter Assault Recon, developed by Monolith Productions, is recognized for its advanced artificial intelligence, which set a new standard for first-person shooters in 2005. The AI-controlled enemies, the replica soldiers, exhibited complex tactical behavior, flanking the player, using cover effectively, communicating with each other, and reacting dynamically to the protagonist's actions. This AI wasn't based on predefined scripts, but on a goal-planning system, making each confrontation unpredictable and challenging. The combat was intensified by a slow-motion mechanic called reflex time. Similar to Max Payne's bullet time, this ability allowed the player to react to intense combat situations with greater precision. The combination of reflex time with advanced AI created a gameplay loop where the player needed to think tactically to overcome enemies that also acted in a coordinated manner. The weapon design and sound effects contributed to the sense of impact, with visual and auditory feedback that made each shot satisfying. Graphically, the game used the Jupiter X engine, which stood out for its particle effects, dynamic lighting, and object physics. The environments, though often composed of corridors and offices, were highly interactive, with debris, smoke, and sparks filling the air during shootouts. These visual elements, combined with slow motion, created a spectacle of destruction that was technically impressive for the time and served to amplify the intensity of the combat. Beyond the action, F.E.A.R integrated psychological horror elements inspired by Japanese horror cinema. The narrative, involving a paranormal task force investigating a secret military project, is punctuated by sudden appearances and inexplicable events, starring the figure of Alma Wade. Devil May Cry 3: Dante's Awakening. From 2005 for PC, PS2, and Nintendo Switch and later versions, elevates the hack-and-slash genre with a dynamic combat-style system that allows real-time switches between modes like Trickster for mobility, Swordmaster for advanced melee combos, Gunslinger for firearm focus, and Royal Guard for perfect defenses, offering depth and replayability that far surpass the simplified systems of modern action games like Bayonetta 3 or the recent God of War, where combos are often reduced to repetitive sequences and quick-time events to facilitate casual access, while DMC3 demands mastery and constant adaptation, humiliating current titles by rewarding skill with style rankings that encourage experimentation in fights against varied demons, from possessed puppets to epic bosses like Virgil, creating a stylized dance of violence that feels alive and personal. The challenging but fair and progressive difficulty builds player skill through levels that scale in complexity, with modes like Bloody Palace for infinite challenges, contrasting drastically with modern games that offer excessive easy modes and automatic assists to avoid frustration, like in Devil May Cry 5 itself, which, despite being a sequel, dilutes the original intensity by making combats more accessible, but DMC3 maintains a steep learning curve that turns failures into lessons, humiliating current productions full of hand-holding and frequent checkpoints that remove the sense of achievement. Its bombastic heavy metal soundtrack, with tracks like Devils Never Cry, and an over-the-top aesthetic full of sarcastic humor and exaggerated demonic designs, create a unique and energetic identity that surpasses the serious narrative attempts in games like Nier Automata, where the philosophical tone can weigh heavy, while DMC3 balances frantic action with charismatic cutscenes, like Dante's taunts, exposing how modern releases often sacrifice fun for generic artistic pretensions. Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell Chaos Theory is often cited as the pinnacle of the stealth genre. Released in 2005, the game refined the mechanics of its predecessors to a notable level of technical detail. The light and shadow system, a pillar of the series, was taken to a new level with dynamic lighting that affected gameplay in a realistic way. The protagonist's stealth, Sam Fisher, was measured by a light and sound meter, forcing the player to move slowly and use the environment to their advantage. The addition of a knife allowed new close combat options and interrogations, expanding the range of player actions. The audio-visual quality of Chaos Theory was exceptional for its time, especially in the PC and Xbox versions. The Unreal Engine 2.5 was modified to support advanced effects like normal mapping, HDR rendering, and specular lighting, resulting in detailed textures and visually rich and atmospheric environments. The soundtrack, composed by Eamon Tobin, was dynamic and adapted to the player's situation, alternating between ambient and tense themes, which contributed significantly to immersion and suspense. The narrative, while following the franchise's geopolitical espionage formula, was well executed with a sharp script and excellent voice acting. The interactions between Sam Fisher and his support team were full of dry humor and professionalism, which helped build the world and the characters' personalities. In addition to the main campaign, the game introduced a cooperative mode with its own campaign, and an asymmetric multiplayer mode, Spies vs. Mercs, which deepened the gameplay and extended the title's longevity. Battlefield 2 from 2005, exclusively for PC, innovates in multiplayer with large-scale battles involving up to 64 players in modes like Conquest, where teams capture strategic points using specialized classes like Sniper, Engineer, or Medic, offering tactical team depth that humiliates modern online modes full of pay-to-win and unstable matchmaking, like in Call of Duty Warzone. While BF2 balances vehicles like tanks, helicopters, and jets with infantry, creating organized chaos that rewards coordination without microtransactions, exposing the superficiality of current titles that prioritize loot boxes over balanced gameplay in vast maps inspired by real conflicts. Its extensive and detailed maps, like Strike at Karkand with urban streets and destructible bridges, encourage dynamic strategies and adaptation, contrasting with the generic and repetitive designs of modern battle royales like Fortnite, where the focus on seasonal events dilutes the essence, but BF2 maintains a multiplayer purity, with community mods that extend its lifespan, humiliating current games that die quickly due to forced updates and abandoned servers. The fluid gameplay with realistic vehicle physics and precise shootouts without lags on connections of the time highlights superior optimization and humiliates modern releases with netcode issues, like Battlefield 2042 itself, which launched broken despite advanced hardware. Finally, its emphasis on collective tactics and immersion in modern wars remains unmatched, humiliating productions that focus on skins and limited events instead of strategic depth. Burnout 3 Takedown, developed by Criterion Games, redefined the arcade racing genre by introducing an aggressive core mechanic, the takedowns. Instead of just focusing on finishing first, the game actively encouraged players to eliminate opponents by crashing them into traffic, walls, or other obstacles. Each successful takedown rewarded the player by filling their boost bar, which provided instant acceleration. This mechanic turned races into high-speed vehicular combats, creating an addictive risk and reward gameplay loop. The game stood out for its sense of speed, which was technically notable for the PlayStation 2 and Xbox hardware. Criterion achieved a nearly constant 60 frames per second rate, providing an extremely fluid and responsive racing experience. This performance was complemented by motion blur effects and a camera that shook at high speeds, intensifying immersion and adrenaline. The track designs, set in fictional locations in the US, Europe, and Asia, were full of shortcuts, ramps, and dense traffic, creating a chaotic playground for destruction. One of the most striking aspects of Burnout 3 was its collision and damage system. Although not a realistic simulation, the vehicle deformation was spectacular and cinematic. After a collision, the game entered slow motion, showing the destruction in detail, a mechanic that would become a signature of the series. In addition to traditional races, the game featured the crash mode, where the goal was to cause the most monetary damage possible by launching the car into a busy intersection, turning destruction into a strategic puzzle. Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time revolutionized the action-adventure genre by introducing time manipulation mechanics in an organic and narratively integrated way. The power to rewind time wasn't just an impressive technical trick, but an essential tool that completely transformed the gaming experience. This innovation allowed developers to create extremely challenging puzzles and platforming sequences without frustrating players. The combat system, though relatively simple, was elegant and cinematic, with fluid animations that made each confrontation feel like choreography. The prince's skill progression was gradual and satisfying, culminating in increasingly impressive temporal powers. The balance between all the game's mechanics was practically perfect. Compared to modern action-adventure games, The Sands of Time stands out for its thematic and narrative cohesion. While many current titles suffer from feature bloat and empty open worlds, this classic offered a focused and memorable experience. The genuine innovation in gameplay mechanics and storytelling set standards that the industry still tries to replicate, proving that creative ideas outperform million-dollar budgets.
Many men that day sought to win honor and glory on the battlefield, that their king might say to them, as Khosrow said to Rustam, "You are the noblest of my warriors." From the moment my sword tasted blood, I knew this would not be my way. I would win my father's praise, not by killing, but by being the first to find the Maharaja's treasure vault and the wonders within.
Beyond Good and Evil, directed by Michel Ancel, is an action-adventure game that stood out for its unique mix of genres and ambitious narrative. The gameplay combined elements of exploration, combat, stealth, puzzle solving, and even wildlife photography. The protagonist, Jade, a photojournalist, uses her camera not only to document the fauna of the planet Hillies in exchange for money, but also to expose a government conspiracy, integrating the photography mechanic directly into the story progression. The combat system was simple but functional, based on single-button combos and dodges. Although not as deep as other action titles of the time, it served its purpose within the game's varied structure. The stealth sections were more prominent, requiring the player to use the environment to hide and move undetected, creating moments of tension that contrasted with the freer exploration of the outside world. Despite not being a commercial success upon release, Beyond Good and Evil was acclaimed by critics and developed a cult classic status over the years. Its ambition in mixing different gameplay styles cohesively and telling a mature and engaging story was a notable achievement. The game is an example of how creative design and a strong narrative can create a memorable and lasting experience, even without standing out in a single technical aspect in a revolutionary way. Ico established a new paradigm for storytelling in video games by telling a deeply emotional story almost entirely through visual language and gameplay mechanics. The relationship between Ico and Yorda was developed organically through player interactions, without relying on elaborate cutscenes or expository dialogues. This minimalist approach created a genuine emotional connection that few games have managed to replicate. The game's art direction was absolutely revolutionary, creating environments that looked like moving paintings. The dark castle where the action unfolds was as much a character as a setting, with each room telling part of the story through its architecture and lighting. The deliberately limited color palette created a unique atmosphere that remains visually impactful 2 decades later. The gameplay design focused on the core mechanic of protecting and guiding Yorda, transforming the traditional escort mission concept into something genuinely engaging. Yorda's vulnerability wasn't a source of frustration, but the emotional heart of the experience. Every moment of danger created real tension because the player genuinely cared about her safety. Compared to modern narrative games, Ico stands out for its trust in the player's emotional intelligence. While many current titles over-explain their themes and emotions, Ico allowed players to discover and interpret the story for themselves. This respectful approach to the audience established a template for storytelling in games that continues to influence developers today, proving that less can definitely be more. Gran Turismo 3 A-Spec was a monumental technical leap for racing games and a defining title for the PlayStation 2. Released early in the console's life cycle, it set a new standard for visual fidelity that many later games struggled to achieve. The game featured car models with a significantly higher polygon count than anything seen before on a console, with meticulous attention to detail, from the bodies to the wheels and brake calipers. The real-time lighting and reflections on the car's surfaces were particularly impressive, giving the vehicles a realistic and solid appearance. The physics engine of Gran Turismo 3 was a significant advancement over its predecessors on the PlayStation. Although still an accessible simulation, the car behavior was much more nuanced. The game simulated aspects like weight transfer, tire grip, and suspension effects more realistically, requiring players to have greater control over acceleration, braking, and racing lines to succeed. This depth in simulation was one of the main attractions for motorsport enthusiasts. The career mode structure, or Gran Turismo mode, was addictive and extensive. Players started with a modest production car and needed to win races to earn money, which was used to buy new vehicles and upgrade existing ones with a vast range of aftermarket parts. Compared to modern racing games, Gran Turismo 3 stands out for its purity of focus and attention to detail. While many current titles dilute themselves with arcade elements or artificial progression systems, GT3 maintained its commitment to authenticity. The passion for automobiles was evident in every aspect of the game, from the recorded engine sounds to the detailed descriptions of each vehicle, establishing a quality standard that remains a reference in the industry. Well, that was the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and see you in the next video.